Okay, now we're going to look at our muscle list and look at our muscles that are divided up into different regions. The first one will be the muscles of the head and neck. Now this is by no means a complete list of muscles. There are nearly 700 muscles, so we're obviously just looking at some of the major ones and mostly some of the superficial or outside muscles, because muscles tend to be layered over each other. Some of them are deep, some of them are more superficial, some of them are partly deep and partly superficial. So let's go ahead and look at our first muscles of the head, and by learning the skull you kind of have learned some of the terminology that we would use for muscles, so that puts you at a little bit of an advantage already having done the skull. Okay, so the first muscle we're going to look at is actually sometimes you will see it as two different muscles, but it can be considered one connected muscle, and it is called the occipitofrontalis. And it can be made up of a muscle called the frontalis and a muscle called the occipitalis. So, and it attaches to a tendon called the epicranius, which you call your scalp. Okay, this is a picture of the muscle model, where on the model the first thing we need to understand is that since muscles are layered, one side of the model will be more the superficial areas, the other side will be the deeper areas. Okay, so in this case we are seeing the frontalis portion of the occipitofrontalis, and we would actually see this area back here would be the occipitalis portion of the occipitofrontalis, and of course this is called the galea aponeurotica, otherwise known as your scalp, this gray area through here. So on the models, the reddish area is the muscle, the gray area is the tendon. So your scalp is a big tendon. Again, there's the frontalis, there's the occipitalis, and together from here to back to here, not including this area, but from here back to here is the occipitofrontalis. Notice the next two names are orbicularis oculi and orbicularis oris. Orbicularis tells us that it's muscles that circle or orbit something, and oculi refers to eye, and oris refers to mouth. So this should be a muscle circling the eye, and this should be a muscle circling the mouth. So let's look at those. Okay, so here, let me slide this over. Okay, here we can see the muscle that is circling the eye right through here. And here we can see the muscle that is circling the mouth. Now notice there may be some muscles that, run to it, under it, and even some muscles that run partially over it. But it's this muscle circling the mouth. So orbiculi oris circles the mouth, orbicularis oculi circles the eye. Okay, so we have a cheek muscle called the buccinator. The zygomaticus, we know, must have something to do with that zygomatic bone, that cheek bone. And then the masseter is one of the strongest muscles, definitely the strongest muscle in your face. And this is the muscle that helps you bite. So let's look at these three. So here's the buccinator. It's in your cheek region right through here. It actually helps you compress your cheeks to like blow air out. So if you imagine somebody blowing a bugle or some sort of horn, then you would have to use these muscles to compress the air. Here we have the zygomaticus. Notice it is actually a split muscle that runs over the zygomatic or cheekbone right here. And then the masseter is this thick muscle that you actually use to bite with. So this compresses, allowing you to pull your jaw up and bite down. Okay, the next muscle is the temporalis muscle. So we know it must have something to do with that temporal bone that we talked about in the skull. Okay, notice your temporal bone is in this region right here. So the temporalis muscle is basically over that, even though it does overlap some other bones. It is actually deep to some other muscles that lie on top of it, such as the auricularis, but temporalis is the one on your structure sheet, so you need to know it's this muscle, basically in the temporal region. The sternocleidomastoid and the platysma are two muscles in the neck region. This is a very prominent muscle, and this is a very superficial muscle that covers a lot of other muscles. Because it covers so many muscles, sometimes they leave it off of pictures, but I'll try to show you an example of it. Okay, so the sternocleidomastoid, and of course it's on both sides, but this side of the model showing the more superficial muscles. So it's starting down here at the sternum area, kind of the clavicle sternum area, because sterno means sternum, clito or clito means clavicle, and then mastoid refers to that mastoid process that's behind your ear, that protrusion off that temporal bone. So this is a very prominent muscle in the neck that actually helps you kind of turn your head, and you can feel it if you turn your head and kind of tense your neck up some. Now the platysma is actually a very broad muscle that runs. It covers your sternocleidomastoid here and all these muscles under it. It runs up over them, and it actually runs all the way up to almost your zygomaticus muscle. Okay, it runs up basically to your buccinator region here. So it runs all the way up your neck over part of your face. Now here, notice on this, because it covers so many muscles here, that they cut it and pulled it back so you can literally see what's under it. So, you know, it's a broad, superficial, but not very thick muscle, but it does run from basically your clavicle all the way up your neck, all the way up to your cheek region. Okay, so the next muscles we're going to look at are muscles of the trunk. We're going to look at the big chest muscle, at the muscles between the ribs, the six packs that people like to call them, the muscles in the middle of the stomach. And if you see rectus, usually means in the middle of something. So rectus abdominis would be in the middle of the abdomen. And then the muscles that's on our side, which are called obliques, external obliques. Okay, then we have internal obliques and transversus abdominis. These three muscles are layered on top of each other, and this is obviously going to be the outside layer, this will be the middle layer, and this will be the inside layer. So let's look at these muscles first. So your pectoralis major is this big chest muscle. It is on both sides, but again on the model, what's on this side is superficial or outside. What's underneath this area is shown on this side. So you actually do have a pectoralis minor muscle that's underneath the pectoralis major, along with, we can see here, if these are ribs, then intercostal means between the ribs, costal referring to this type of cartilage called costal cartilage. So we have ribs, and we have muscles between them called intercostal muscles. We can see that we actually have two different types, but you just need to know intercostal muscle. And then we actually see that we have our rectus abdominis, the muscles in the middle of our stomach. It does have a sheath that covers it, but you just need to know the muscles. People say six pack, but in reality it's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and then you have the oblique muscles. So this oblique muscle, that's the most outside layer, is the external oblique, and notice the fibers run in a certain direction. Here we see the three layers. We see this would be the external oblique, the layers we just looked at. Then under it would be the internal oblique, and its fibers would run in a different direction because it would allow you to actually move at a slightly different angle than your outside layer. And then finally, notice how the muscle fibers here are running transversely. So this is your inside layer, and this is from the superficial, deeper, and deepest. So we're looking from the inside, and these would be your transversus abdominis. So again, your oblique muscles have three layers, from out to in: external oblique, internal oblique, and transversus abdominis. Okay, our two biggest back muscles is our trapezius and our latissimus dorsi. So we'll look at those. So here we see our trapezius right here, kind of forms a V shape, and it actually runs across your shoulders. You can see part of it from the front side and runs even up your neck. So even from the front side, we can see the trapezius right through here, but of course we see more of it, and here we see the trapezius right through here, but we see more of it running down the back. The latissimus dorsi, though, is the largest back muscle, and it actually runs from your back all the way to your axillary or armpit region and down to that oscoxal hip bone region. So this is the largest back muscle, And then this is also a large back muscle, the latissimus dorsi. Sometimes people call them their lats, but of course I want you to use the proper terms for this class. And some people call the trapezius their traps. And I'll try to put that whole thing in the screen. So the traps here and the lats here. Okay, next two muscles on our list, the deltoid, or your shoulder muscle, named after the Greek letter delta because it's shaped like a triangle. And then an internal muscle that without it you would not be able to breathe. So this is your diaphragm, and you hopefully saw the diaphragm when you dissected the fetal pig. Let's look at the deltoid. Okay, here's a picture of the deltoid. Notice, even though we're seeing basically the back, the posterior side, and the lateral side, notice how it does form kind of a triangular appearance. Ties into something called a deltoid tuberosity on your humerus. But notice that it does have that triangular appearance. Here we see it on the anterior side. Now we're going to look at muscles of the upper limb, which the deltoid is definitely part of that. Probably the best known muscle in the body, the bicep brachii, but we do need to use the term brachii, which means upper arm, because we actually have a bicep femoris, which is a muscle that we would find in the leg. So we're clear on whether we're talking about the leg or the arm. We have to use the term femoris if we're talking about the leg, but for right now we're talking about the arm, so we have to use the term brachii, which again means upper arm. So bicep brachii. Then we have a muscle directly underneath it called the brachialis. We have a muscle that is actually close to this called the brachioradialis. Then we have a muscle that does the opposite of the bicep called the tricep brachii. Bi means two, tri means three, so this muscle has what we call two bellies, and this muscle has three bellies. So let's look at these really quickly. Okay, here again we see the deltoid, the triangular shaped shoulder muscle. Here we see the bicep, and notice that it's got this little division here because this is a belly and that's a belly, and so it's going to be the muscle on the front of your arm that helps you raise your lower arm, but directly underneath it is the brachialis. Now the bicep itself does not attach to the humerus, even though the humerus is running through here, but the brachialis does attach to the humerus. So the bicep runs over the humerus. It actually starts up here at that coracoid process we looked at, and it runs down here and attaches to a couple places in the lower arm. Okay, now, so if this is the bicep right here, on the medial side, the inside of the arm, starting about a third of the way up from the humerus and attaching to the coracoid process, this is the coracobrachialis muscle. So here's my bicep, here's my coracobrachialis, not to be confused with the muscle that lies directly underneath, more on the lateral side, but the bicep runs across this. That's the brachialis. Now, on the back of the arm then, so again we see the brachialis right here, but on the back of the arm here we have the tricep brachii, which actually has an area right through here, an area right through here, an area right through here, and an area right through here. So that's a tendon where it's attaching it to the olecranon area. Okay, so I've got this tricep brachii, 1, 2, 3. This is the smallest head of it. So I've got a lateral head, a long head, and a short head on this. Okay, we have two things here that both have the term retinaculum in them. And again, as it says, it's not a muscle, but it's connective tissue that holds tendons in place. Now, muscle attaches to the bone by tendons, so there are certain areas where we have to hold that in place. So the retinaculum is connective tissue that does that. And so extensors are forearm muscles that are actually on the backhand side, whereas flexors are forearm muscles that's actually on the palm side. So we see the palm side, we see all these muscles here that are flexors. Notice how they have flexor in the name. So my flexor retinaculum is going to be that connective tissue holding these tendons in place. Now these muscles are extensors. They're on the backhand side, And notice I have, again, I have this tendon